Camille said it out loud. And the grand ballroom of the Hotel Laurent. 300 of the most important people in the food world, in black tie, under the chandeliers, with the press along the far wall and their cameras half raised, laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Worse than cruel. The warm, easy, comfortable laugh of a room agreeing about someone beneath it. I was 26, an omega, and I stood there in a borrowed dress I could not afford to spill on, holding a tray of canapés I had not been hired to carry but had picked up anyway, out of 8 years of habit, because a tray gives your hands a reason to exist in a room that has decided you do not belong. And I felt myself begin to do the thing I had spent my whole adult life perfecting. I made myself small. I made myself quiet. I prepared the way I always prepared to simply stop being there.
Welcome, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
And then the double doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and the laughing stopped. Not slowly, all at once. The way a kitchen goes dead silent when the one person everyone is truly afraid of walks through the door. The woman who came through those doors was Vera. My Vera. The quiet, exact, unhurried woman who had sat at the far end of my counter almost every night for a year, who ordered the same thing and tasted everything twice and pressed her thumb to a worn steel band on her finger when she was thinking. The woman I had married in a registry office 11 weeks before with 2 strangers as witnesses, and no one in the world the wiser. Except every head in that room had turned toward her. The director of the institute had gone the color of paper. The press had surged forward against their rope. And Camille, who feared nothing, who had spent 2 years at the academy teaching me exactly how small I was allowed to be, took one step back, and I understood a full second before Vera began to cross that enormous room toward me, with 300 of the most powerful people in food parting in front of her like she was weather, that I had married this woman without ever once knowing who she actually was. If you want the uncensored, too hot for YouTube version of this story, the parts I cannot tell here, it is on my Patreon, link in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Let me go back, because that moment in the ballroom only means something if you know what I was before it. And what I was before, it was small on purpose. I had made an art of it. I want to tell you how a woman ends up married to a stranger she sat beside every night for a year. And to do that, I have to start with the counter, and the spoon, and the particular silence I had built my whole life inside. My name is Etta. I was a cook, not a chef. I never let myself say chef. Camille had cured me of that word years before. At a place called Odette's, which was a counter. 10 stools and a flat top and a single low lamp, on a side street in the old market quarter where the rents were still almost human, run by a woman named Odette, who was somewhere north of 80 and had been feeding that street for 50 years. There was no menu. You sat down, and Odette or I cooked you what the market had given us that morning, and you ate it, and you paid what the little hand-chalked board said. And it was not fashionable, and it was not photographed, and it was, I believe then and I believe now, some of the best food in the city, and almost no one knew we existed. That was the point of us. Odette used to say, a counter is a confession booth that serves dinner. People tell the truth to someone who is feeding them and not looking at them. And for 8 years, that 10-stool counter was the only place on earth I felt entirely safe, because at a counter you face the food, not the room, and no one watches you be good at the only thing you have ever been good at. I had one thing. I want to be honest about that because it is the whole engine of this story. I had a palate. Not a trained one. Or not only, I had the thing they cannot teach you at the institute and cannot buy at any price. The thing that made everything that happened to me both possible and dangerous. I could taste. I could put a spoon to a sauce and tell you what it had been an hour ago and what it would be an hour from now, where the salt was hiding, what was missing, what was a lie. I could taste a stock and tell you the bones were roasted past their best, taste a reduction and tell you the wine had been corked, taste a dish a famous chef had spent a week designing and tell you, quietly, to myself, the one thing it needed that they had been too clever to leave room for. I had had it since I was a child. My grandmother saw it first. My grandmother is the reason for the spoon, and the spoon is the reason you are going to believe the rest, so let me put her in properly. She raised me. My mother worked nights, and my grandmother had the kitchen, and so I had my grandmother. And she cooked the way poor women who love you cook, which is to say she could make one good chicken feed a family for 4 days, and make each of the 4 days taste like she had meant it. She had a tasting spoon, a battered enamel thing, white gone to gray with a chip on the lip where the metal showed through, and it lived in the pocket of her apron. And the first real memory I have of being myself is standing on a stool beside her with that spoon held up to my mouth and her saying, "What does it want, Etta? Don't tell me what it is." And I would taste, and I would tell her, "More thyme, more salt. It wants something sour. It wants to be left alone." And most of the time a child, before I could properly read, I was right. She did not make a fuss of it. She made it ordinary, which I understand now was the kindest and wisest thing she could have done, because she had seen what the world does to a poor girl who is extraordinary out loud. When she died, I was 19, and the only thing I took from her flat was that spoon, and I have tasted every single thing I have cooked for the last 7 years with it. And on the night everything came apart, it was in the pocket of a borrowed gown, because I do not go anywhere without it. Remember the spoon, it comes back. I have to tell you about the Institute, because the Institute is where I learned to be small. And you cannot understand why I let a woman sit at my counter for a year without ever asking her name unless you understand what asking questions had already cost me. I got in the way the spoon got me everything. On the gift, with no money and no name behind it. The Institut Laurent was where you went to become a real chef, the kind the great houses hire and the great houses fear. And it took the children of restaurant dynasties and hotel families and people who had grown up with a name on a door. And it took, on one scholarship a year, somebody like me, a girl from over a market with a dead grandmother's spoon and a palate she could not explain. I arrived at 18 in shoes that were wrong, and a knife roll that was my grandmother's. And I understood inside a week that I had walked into a country whose language I would never speak. The other students had been raised inside food as a form of wealth. They knew the names, the vintages, the right way to be wrong about a truffle. I knew how to make a sauce tell the truth. And for one term I believed, the way the young and gifted believe, that the truth would be enough. That surely, in a place built to teach people to cook, the girl who could already taste better than any of them would be safe. I was a child. I had not yet learned the only lesson that place actually teaches the likes of me, that the rooms built to honor a gift are the exact rooms most threatened by anyone who walks in already holding one without their permission. And then there was Camille Roux. I'm going to give you the easy version of Camille first. The bully, because the easy version is the only one I had for a long time, and because the easy version is true even if it is not complete. Camille was an alpha and an heir. Her family had a restaurant group, 3 generations, a name carved into the city, and she was beautiful in the certain expensive way that old food families are beautiful, and she was, everyone agreed, the most talented student in our year. I believed it too, for one term, until I understood what Camille actually was, which was the most gifted technician I have ever stood next to, and a woman with no palate at all. She could execute anything. Flawless knife, flawless heat, flawless plate. She could reproduce a dish she had eaten once down to the gram. And she could not taste. She could not stand over a pot and tell you what it wanted. She had to be told, or she had to copy. And the one person in that building who could always tell, instantly, without being told, was the scholarship girl from over the market. We both knew it by the end of the first term. And that, I understand now, years too late, was the beginning of the end for me. Because the one thing the heir of a great food family could not survive being, the thing her formidable mother would never forgive, was a brilliant pair of hands with no tongue, standing every single day next to a charity case who could taste the soul of anything. So she made me small. 2 years of it, done with an adult's precision, Never anything an instructor could act on, never a mark you could point to. It was my mise turning up salted when I had not salted it, the morning of an assessment. It was my station accidentally cleared mid-service, a week's ferment in the bin. It was Camille reading my written work aloud in that bored, amused drawl, finding the one market phrase, the one place my grandmother showed in my vocabulary, and holding it up for the room to enjoy until I dreaded my own handwriting. It was never being invited. The late dinners, the stages, the small alliances that are how a young cook actually builds a life. So that I was alone in a way that looked, from the outside, like I had simply failed to be likable. And it was the rest of the year learning, the way kitchens learn, that the safe thing was to laugh along, so that by the second year I was not being bullied by one rich girl. I was being quietly erased by an entire cohort that had decided I was the acceptable price of staying on the right side of a roux. I told no one. There was no one to tell. And I did not break, which was the problem. Because these things escalate when the target will not break, and it ended the way you already know it ended. Because I told you Camille's line in the ballroom, and you can already hear that it was a line she had been saying about me for 10 years. It ended with the showcase and the dish, and the thing she did that finally taught me what my grandmother had been trying to teach me for free my whole childhood, that a gift without protection is not a blessing. It is only a target with better aim. I want you to understand what my dish was, because everything Camille took and everything I became turns on it. It was not clever. That was the point of it. It was a bowl of broth. My grandmother's broth, the one she made from the bones nobody wanted, clarified until you could read print through it, with a single piece of marrow and 3 leaves of something bitter from the market. And nothing else, nothing to hide behind. The most naked thing a cook can put in front of a judge, because a clear broth has nowhere to lie. I had worked on it for a month. I had it perfect. It tasted like being loved by someone who has no money, which is to say it tasted like the truth, and it was the best thing in that building, and I knew it. And so, I found out later, did Camille, she switched the bowls. It was that simple and that surgical. In the 90 seconds between the pass and the judge's table, Camille, who was plating beside me, who had every right to be at that pass, switched my broth for a bowl of her own. An over-clever consommé she had thrown together that was technically immaculate and tasted of nothing. And she sent it out under my name, and she sent my broth out under hers. And the judges tasted Etta's dish, the cold, clever, empty one, and were polite. And they tasted Camille's dish, mine. And one of them, an old critic with a face like a closed door, put down his spoon and asked who had made it. And Camille said I did, and he said it was the only honest thing he had eaten all night. And the room applauded. And I stood 8 feet away and watched a woman accept the single best compliment of my life for a bowl of my dead grandmother's broth. And when I went, shaking, to an instructor with the only evidence I had, which was my own palate and the truth, Camille got there first. And she was an heir and I was a scholarship, and the story she told was that the charity case had panicked, switched the bowls in a fit of nerves, and was now accusing a roux to cover it. They believed her. Of course they believed her. And the part I have never told anyone, the part that finished me, is what Camille said to me afterward, quietly, in the corridor. Not cruel, just true, the way the powerful are true. You don't have a palate, Etta. You have a sad story and good timing. Cooks like you don't get to author anything. You're a pair of hands. And I lost the scholarship's recommendation. And I lost the cohort. And I lost, for 8 years, the belief that the one thing I had was real. And I did exactly what she told me to do. I found a counter. I kept my head down. I let the great kitchens put their own names on what my palate fixed. Freelance, invisible, fixing other people's sauces for less than they paid for the garnish. I made myself a tongue attached to as little woman as I could manage. It kept me fed, and it kept me safe, and it kept me small for 8 years, until a quiet woman sat down at the far end of Odette's counter on a wet Tuesday in October and ordered the broth. She came in out of the rain. I remember it precisely. The way you remember the last ordinary moment before a life turns, even though at the time it was only a woman, only a Tuesday, only the broth. It was late, near closing, the counter empty, Odette already gone home, and the door opened, and a woman came in shaking the rain off a very plain dark coat. A good coat, I registered, the way I register everything. The kind of plain that costs more than loud, but I did not think anything of it. We got the occasional person who had taken a wrong turn out of the expensive quarter. And she sat down at the far end, the corner stool, the one against the wall, and she looked at the chalkboard. And then she looked at me and said, "What's good tonight?" And I said, "The broth." And she said, "Then the broth," and that was all. That was the entire beginning. She was perhaps 38, though it was hard to say, with dark hair going elegantly iron at the temples, and a face that gave nothing away. A still face. A face that had decided a long time ago not to spend itself, and she had a way of sitting completely still that I had only ever seen in two kinds of people, the very powerful and the very tired. I assumed tired. I was wrong about almost everything that mattered for a year, and I started that very first night, assuming the most powerful woman in the room was simply tired. I made her the broth, and I did the thing I do, which I cannot help, which is the whole trouble with me. I watched her taste it. You learn to read people by how they eat. It is the most honest thing a person does, more honest than how they speak or touch. And I watched this still plain, tired-looking woman lift the spoon and pause and taste. And I saw something move across that closed face, very small, a single flicker, gone almost before it arrived. She set the spoon down. She was quiet for a moment. Not who taught you to cook, who taught you to leave it alone, to trust a clear broth to be enough, to resist the 1,000 clever things a frightened cook does to a simple dish, to let the truth of it stand naked on the tongue with nowhere to hide. No one had asked me a real question about my food in 8 years. I had made very sure of it. And I stood there at my own counter, a grown woman who had trained herself to disappear, and felt something I had not felt since I was a child on a stool with a spoon at my mouth. I felt seen. She came back the next night, and the night after. And then it was simply a thing that was true about my life. The quiet woman came to the counter most nights, late, near closing, the corner stool against the wall, and ordered whatever the board said and tasted everything twice. And we did not, for a very long time, do much more than that. I did not ask her name for 3 weeks. I want you to sit with how strange that is, because it is the strangest and most important fact of this whole story. I let a woman become the center of my evenings, the thing I cooked toward, the reason I started keeping back the good marrow and the first of the bitter greens, and I did not ask her name, because the not asking was the entire basis of it. I had learned expensively that questions are how the world finds the soft place to put the knife. Camille's whole campaign had been built on the things she learned about me, the market, the dead grandmother, the scholarship, the shame. And I had walked out of that institute with a simple total policy. I would never again hand anyone the information they needed to make me small. So I did not ask the woman who she was, and this is the part I did not understand until much too late. She did not tell me. And we built the best thing in my life on a foundation of 2 people each refusing, for completely different reasons, to say who they really were. Just Vera. And I said Etta, and she said I know. It's on the board, which it was in Odette's hand. Etta's broth, Etta's tart. And I felt my face go hot in a way it had not in years. And that was it. That was the whole exchange of identities that our entire first year was built on. Vera, Etta, 2 first names at a counter in the rain. I told myself she was probably a chef on her nights off. She tasted like a chef, that careful double taste, the way she'd touch a sauce to the back of her hand to check the salt against her own skin. Or maybe a critic, which would have frightened me. Or maybe just a wealthy woman with nowhere warm to be. I built a dozen small theories and I tested none of them, because testing them meant asking, and asking meant the door swinging both ways, and I had decided a long time ago to keep that door shut. I see now what I was actually doing. I was protecting the one good thing I had by refusing to learn the thing that could take it away. And she, I know this now, was doing exactly the same. We were two people hiding in plain sight from each other and calling it peace. I want to tell you about the year, because the year is the heart of this. And the year was made almost entirely of restraint. And I know that is not what people mean when they ask for a love story. But it is the truest one I have. Nothing happened for the longest time in the way the word happened is usually used. A woman came to a counter and ate, and a cook cooked, and across a flat top 18 inches wide, two people who had each spent a lifetime not being known slowly, carefully, without ever once saying so, began to know each other. That is the whole of it, for months, and it was the most that had ever happened to me. She changed my cooking first, before she changed anything else, and she did it without ever telling me to do a single thing. She would taste, and she would not flatter me. Vera never once flattered me in the whole time I knew her, which I came to understand was its own kind of devotion. She would taste, and she would say something exact. And she was right, every time, in a way that only one other person in my life had ever been right about my food, and that person was dead, and kept her spoon in an apron pocket. Do you understand what that did to me? For 8 years, I had been fixing other people's food in secret, brilliant and invisible, and I had stopped, somewhere in there, making anything I meant. I cooked to be unobjectionable. I cooked to disappear. And this still, plain woman sat at my counter and declined, gently, night after night, to let me disappear, not by praising me, which I would have flinched from, but by taking me seriously, which I had no defense against at all. My palate woke up. The thing Camille told me I did not have, the thing I had half believed for 8 years I had only imagined, woke up under the attention of a woman whose name I did not know, and I started, for the first time since I was 19, to cook things I meant. She had a way about her that I cataloged the way I catalog everything, helplessly, completely. She sat still. I have said that, but I mean it as the central fact of her. In a city of people performing their own importance, Vera sat at my counter with the absolute stillness of someone who has nothing left to prove and is not lonely inside it, only quiet. She spoke in short, complete sentences and never, not once, raised her voice. I would later see her say 4 words to a man who had every reason to be terrified of her, and watch the man go gray, all without volume. And I would understand that Vera had learned long ago that the truly powerful never need to be loud. But at my counter, that stillness only read as calm, as a deep and restful exactness, and I steered my whole evening by it, and she had to tell. 1, the way the very contained always have one thing the control leaks out of. When Vera was thinking, when she was deciding something, her thumb would find a worn steel band on her right hand, a plain old ring, and press it once, slowly. And I learned to read that thumb the way sailors read a sky. I did not know for a year that the ring was the only thing she still wore from a life she had walked out of. I only knew that when her thumb went to the band, something in her was choosing, and I held my breath, and I waited, and I cooked. I started underselling myself to her, which I think now was a test I did not know I was running. It's just a tart, I'd say, sliding it across. That was all. And the next time I did it, she said it again. And the time after that, until it became a thing between us, a small ceremony. I would diminish myself out of 8 years of habit, and Vera would refuse the diminishment every single time, flatly, as if it were simply a factual error she was correcting. It is never just. And somewhere in the 3rd month of that, I stopped being able to say the word just about my own food at all, because I could hear her voice over it before it left my mouth. She was unteaching me Camille. She did not know that. I had never told her about Camille. She was just, night after night, refusing to let me call the best thing I had nothing. Odette saw it before I would let myself see it. Odette saw everything. 80 years on a market street will do that. She did not work the late shift anymore. Her hip had retired before she had. But she came in for the prep and the gossip and to make sure I had not, in her words, started cooking like I was sorry. And she clocked Vera inside a week. "Your corner woman," she called her. And I would say yes, too quickly. And Odette would make a sound in her throat that 80-year-old women make, a whole paragraph of a sound, and go back to the favas. And one afternoon, months in, she sat me down with the bitter coffee she made that could strip a pan, and she said the thing that I have kept, the way I keep the spoon. She said, "Etta, I have watched you cook for this whole city, like you were apologizing for the noise you make existing. And for the last few months, I have watched you cook for one woman in the corner, like you finally believe you're allowed to take up the room. I don't know who she is. You don't seem to know who she is either, which at my age I find either very stupid or very romantic, and I haven't decided. But I am old, and I am going to say the thing, because nobody said it to me when I was your age and I lost 10 years to the silence. That woman is not coming for the broth. She is coming for the person who can make a broth mean that, and you are not cooking for a customer. So one of you is going to have to be brave, and it is not going to be the one who sits that still." And I told her she was wrong. The way you tell the truth, it is too early to hear. And I went and stood at the flat top and shook, because Odette was never wrong about a kitchen, and a kitchen is just people standing close together pretending the heat is the only reason they're warm. I have to be honest about the part of this that frightened me most, because it is the part that should have made me ask her name, and instead it made me hold the silence tighter. I am an omega. I had spent my adult life managing that the way I managed everything. Carefully, privately, with suppressants and discipline, and a wide cold moat around the place in me where a bond was supposed to go, because I had learned again from Camille, again the hard way, that for a girl with no name and no protection, a bond is just one more soft place for the world to aim at. I did not let people close enough to scent. I did not let myself read the room that way. And then there was Vera, 18 inches away, most nights, for months. And somewhere in the spring, I stopped being able to not notice that she steadied me. That the moment she came through the door out of the cold, the whole jangling alarm I lived inside went quiet. That her scent, clean, low, like cold stone, and something darker underneath, like the inside of a great old cellar, did the thing to my chest that the suppressants were specifically supposed to prevent. An alpha. I had known, I suppose, without letting myself know. The way you know weather is coming before you'll admit you have to bring the washing in. Vera was an alpha, and she was the first alpha in my life whose nearness did not feel like exposure. It felt like the opposite of exposure. It felt like the one place I did not have to keep watch. And that terrified me more than any of Camille's cruelties ever had, because cruelty I knew how to survive. It was being safe that I had no idea what to do with. And here's the thing I need you to understand about Vera, the thing that is the entire reason I trusted her. Before I knew a single true fact about her life, she never once used it. She must have scented me. I know now exactly how good her nose was. It was famous. It was half of what built what she built. She must have known that first month what I was and what was happening in me, and she did nothing with it. She did not lean in. She did not press the advantage that every instinct and every story says an alpha presses. She sat at her stool 18 inches and a flat top away, with her thumb on her steel ring, and she let me come toward the warmth at exactly the speed I could bear, and not 1 degree faster, for months, when she could have simply turned the full weight of what she was on me. And I do not think, God help me, that I could have stopped her. She had all the power. I understand that now in a way I could not have then. She had, it turns out, more power than almost anyone alive in our world. And she sat at a 10-stool counter and made herself small enough to fit through the narrow door of a frightened woman's trust. And she waited. People ask me, when I tell them a careful version of this, how I could have married a stranger. They have it backwards. I did not marry a stranger. I married the only person who had ever made me feel safe before she had told me a single thing about herself, which, when you have been hunted your whole life for the one thing you're good at, is not less than knowing someone. It is more. The wounds surfaced in the spring, the way old wounds do, sideways, when you think you have finally walked far enough from them. I had a second life Vera did not know about: the freelance work, the secret fixing, great kitchens with a problem they could not solve and too much pride to admit would find me quietly, by word of mouth among sous chefs, and I would come in after service or before it and taste my way through whatever was broken, a signature sauce that had lost itself, a tasting menu that did not move, a new chef who could execute the old chef's dishes perfectly and could not understand why they had gone dead, and I would fix it, palate and instinct, an hour's work, and they would pay me in cash and never use my name, and that suited us both. It was Camille's prophecy, lived out. A pair of hands, a tongue for hire. I'd made my peace with it, mostly, because it fed me and it kept me invisible, and invisible had kept me safe. But one evening that spring, a fixer's call came in for a kitchen I had never been inside. One of the truly serious ones. A restaurant with the kind of reputation that does not advertise because it does not need to. And I went, after hours, and I stood in the most beautiful kitchen I had ever been in. Quiet, exact, everything in its place. A kitchen that ran the way Vera sat. And I fixed a sauce that a very frightened young chef de cuisine had let drift. And as I was leaving, I saw, on the corkboard by the pass, the way every kitchen has its gods pinned up, a single small photograph of a woman, dark hair going iron at the temples, a still face, and underneath it in someone's careful hand, the one word the whole staff apparently steered by, and I did not let myself read it. I want to be exact about this because it is the closest I came to the truth before the truth came for me. I saw the photograph, I recognized the woman, and I turned my eyes away from the word under it and walked out into the street, because I had built my entire piece on not asking who Vera was, and I was not going to let a corkboard take from me the one thing I had chosen to keep. I told myself it was a coincidence, a woman who looked like her. I am very good, it turns out, at not seeing the thing that will cost me the thing I love. My mother was the same. It is a poor woman's skill, and it is not a virtue, and it nearly ruined me. I want to give you one night, because the year was made of nights like it, and you should have at least one of them whole, to understand what I mean when I say the restraint was the romance. It was deep winter, the worst of it, the kind of cold that empties a market quarter by 8 o'clock, and the counter was dead, and I should have closed. And I did not close, because Vera had not come yet, and I had stopped pretending to myself that I closed on time on the night she had not come yet. She came in near 11, snow on the plain dark coat, later than she had ever come, and there was something wrong with her. Not loud. Nothing about Vera was ever loud, but I had spent months learning the millimeter language of that still face, and I could read, that night, that something had happened in the other country. The one I did not ask about. The one with her real name in it. She sat at the corner stool. Her thumb went to the steel ring and stayed there, which it never did. The ring was for a single press, a decision made. That night, her thumb just held it, the way you hold a hand. And I did the only thing I knew how to do for her, the only language I had ever been fluent in. I did not ask. I cooked. I made her something that was not on the board, something small and warm, and entirely without cleverness. A thing my grandmother made for the nights the rent was short and the wind was up, and I set it in front of her without a word, and I watched her taste it, and I watched the wrong thing in her face go quiet. 1 degree, the way a stock stops fighting you when you finally lower the heat. That was all. She did not explain the night or the other country or what had been taken from her in it. She just laid that one sentence on the counter between us like a card turned face up, and I understood that she had handed me, in 9 words, more of the truth of her life than she had handed me in all the months before, and that she had done it not in spite of being unable to tell me her name, but somehow underneath it, around it, the way water gets where it is going. And I wanted, with an intensity that frightened me, to come around the end of the counter the way she had not yet come around it, to close the 18 inches that were the whole architecture of us, to put my hands on either side of that still face and tell her that I would feed her every night for the rest of my life and want nothing back but this, but the corner stool, but the snow on the coat, but her, I did not. I did. I stood at the flat top with my grandmother's spoon in my hand, and I held the distance, because I had learned that the distance was the gift. That for two people built like us, the not reaching was the most tender thing there was, the daily proof that neither of us would ever take from the other, the way the world had taught us both that it takes. Her scent was all through the small room, cold stone and the dark thing under it, and it had me by the chest, and I let it, and I did not move. That was the night I knew. Not the night we touched, not the night we bonded, not the registry office. This one, the dead cold Tuesday, with the unasked grief on the counter and the unbridged 18 inches, was the night I understood I was going to spend my life with this woman, whoever she was, because she had just told me she had been starving since she was a child, and I was the first person who had ever filled the bowl and reached for nothing. And that is the whole of what I had to give anyone. And she had found it, and she had wept over it without a single tear in the only language either of us could speak. We bonded in the early summer, and I married her 3 weeks after that. And I did both of those things, still calling her only Vera. And I need to tell you why. Because you married a stranger is the accusation, and I married the only safety I'd ever known is the truth. And the distance between them is this story. It happened the way the rest of it had happened. Slowly, and then not slowly at all. There was a night, a bad night, the anniversary of the showcase. Though I did not tell her that. I never told her about Camille. I only went very quiet and salted everything wrong. And Vera, who read me the way I read a sauce, did not ask what was wrong. She closed the door. She turned the chalkboard around. She came around the end of the counter, which she had never done. Not once in all those months. The counter was the rule. The counter was the safe wall. And she stood on my side of it for the first time, close, not touching, her scent like cold stone all through the small warm room. And she said, "Whatever it is that taught you to make yourself this small, it lied to you. You have the best palate in this city. I have tasted everything this city has. And I, who had been called a sad story with good timing by the only other person who ever understood what I could do, I came apart, quietly, the way contained people come apart. And she did not hold me, because she always knew, that I could not yet bear to be held. And she stood close enough that I could and let me choose it, and after a long time I did. I put my forehead against her shoulder. That was the first time we touched, months in. A forehead against a shoulder in a closed kitchen, her steel ring cold where her hand finally, slowly, came up to the back of my neck. Not a claim, not yet, just a hand, just here. And her scent folding the alarm in me down to nothing. And I thought, with the clarity you only get at the bottom of yourself, I don't care who she is. I have never in my life been this unafraid. That was the whole of my reasoning, and I have never once regretted it, even on the night it nearly destroyed me. The bond came not long after. In the slow, private way, two careful people do a thing the world usually does loud. No announcement, no pack, no families. Because she said she had none that counted, and I did not have the kind you tell. Just the two of us, and a quiet and a choice spoken plainly. And the marriage was a registry office on a Tuesday, because Vera said, with her thumb on her ring, that she wanted at least one thing in her life to be true on paper. And I signed Etta and watched her sign a surname I barely looked at. I want you to believe me, I barely looked at it. I had spent a year training my eyes away from her name, and a registry clerk's handwriting is its own protection. And two strangers off the street witnessed it, and we ate the broth after, in the closed counter. Just us. And it was, until 11 weeks later, the best day of my life. I had married Vera. I knew her stillness and her exactness and the way her thumb found the ring. I knew she took her coffee black and grief privately. I knew she had walked out of some old life and would not speak of it, and I had decided her silence about her past was the twin of my silence about mine, and that we would simply be each other's amnesty. I knew the woman entirely. I did not know one single fact about her life, and I had genuinely, completely made my peace with that. Right up until the invitation arrived, and the world I had spent 8 years hiding from sent a gilt-edged card to a counter to drag me into a ballroom and show me, in front of 300 people, exactly who I had married. 2 things arrived in the same week, and between them, they ended the life I had built. The first was a letter from the bank that I was not supposed to see, because it was addressed to Odette, but Odette's eyes were going, and she handed me the post most mornings now and asked me to read out anything that was not a circular, and so I was the one who read aloud, in the empty counter at 10 in the morning, that the building had been sold over our heads to a developer, that the lease would not be renewed, that Odette's 50 years of feeding a street, the only place I had ever been safe, had until the end of the season, and then it would be a lobby. Odette took it the way she took everything, with a small, terrible calm, and said, well, and went back to the favas. And I stood there with the letter in my hand and felt the floor of my life tilt, because I had arranged my entire existence around that counter being the fixed point, the one room the world could not get into, and the world had simply bought it. I read it 3 times. They had found me, some assistant working an alumni list, scraping the bottom of the scholarship rolls for warm bodies to fill a charitable-looking table. And they had, without knowing it, sent a gilt-edged card to the exact woman that institute had spent 2 years teaching to never come back. I put it in the bin, and Sage took it out. I have to introduce Sage properly, because Sage is the reason I was in that ballroom at all, and Sage meant nothing but love by it, which is how the people who love us deliver us to the worst nights of our lives. Sage was the commis, 19, all elbows and devotion, the kid Odette had taken on because Odette always took on one more kid. And Sage worshipped me in the uncomplicated way the young worship anyone who lets them stand close to the real thing. Sage knew a sanitized version of the Institute story, knew I had trained there and would not talk about it. And Sage fished that invitation out of the bin and ironed it flat on the prep table and stood in front of me with it like a subpoena. You have to go, Sage said. Chef. And I said no. And Sage said the thing that got under the wall, the thing that 19 says, because 19 has not yet learned that some rooms cannot be won. They think you're nobody. You're the best cook in this whole city and they think you're nobody and you're just gonna let them keep thinking it? And I should have said yes. I am going to let them keep thinking it. Because being thought nobody is a kind of armor, and I had worn it 8 years and it had kept me alive. But Odette's was closing. The fixed point was gone. And somewhere in me, under 8 years of careful smallness, the 19-year-old who had made a broth that made an old critic put down his spoon stood up and wanted, just once, to walk back into the room that had erased her and not disappear. So I said yes. God forgive me. I said yes. I told myself I was going for Odette's to stand in that room and represent the kind of cooking they were paving over. I did not tell Vera. I told her I was working a private event, which was almost true. And I did not tell her where or what, because the gala was the institute, and the institute was the wound. And Vera and the wound lived in 2 different countries in me. And I had no idea, none of that they were about to turn out to be the same country all along. I borrowed the dress from Sage's older sister, and it did not fit the person I was, only the person I was pretending to be. And I put my grandmother's spoon in the small pocket at the hip, because I do not go anywhere without it. And I went to the Hotel Laurent, and I knew I had made a mistake the moment I crossed the threshold. The ballroom was everything the counter was not. Vast and gilded and loud, with the particular volume of important people performing their importance for one another. 300 of them, the whole industry, the chefs whose faces I knew from magazines and the critics whose words could end you, and the money behind all of it, and along one wall the press, and over everything the banners of the galas which I registered the way you register wallpaper. A single elegant word I was too frightened to really read. I did not belong. and a lifetime of not belonging had taught my hands what to do about it. Within 10 minutes, I had drifted to the edge, and within 15, I had, without deciding to, picked up a tray of canapes off a service station, because a tray is a passport. A tray means you have a reason. A tray lets a woman who does not belong move through a room like she is part of its machinery instead of an error in it. I was going to spend the evening being furniture. That was my plan. Be furniture. Stand for Odette's in my own silent heart. Leave early and never tell anyone I had come. And then a voice I had spent 8 years and a great deal of money trying to forget said, from a few feet away, bright and delighted and pitched perfectly to Carrie, "No, no, it can't be." Etta? Camille had aged into exactly what the Institute builds. She was a star now. I knew it the way you know the weather of your own industry. Her face on the covers, her group expanding, her name the kind of name that gets a table anywhere by existing. And she stood in front of me in a tuxedo that cost more than Odette's took in a month, a glass in her hand and an audience already gathering at her shoulders out of the instinct that tells a room something entertaining is about to be free. And she looked at me with that old amusement, the amusement that had taught me to dread my own existence, and she performed me for the crowd. "Everyone, you have to. This is wonderful. This is Etta. We trained together." And the people around her laughed already, just at the word, because they could hear what was coming the way you hear a joke shape before its end. And Camille told them the story. She told them the showcase, reshaped by 10 years and her own telling into a comedy. The charity case who switched the bowls and panicked and accused a Roux, the sad scholarship girl with a dead grandmother. And the chip on her shoulder, who could not take the pressure and had been, working some little counter ever since. And 300 people, or the 40 within earshot, who were all the world in that moment, laughed the warm, comfortable laugh of a room agreeing about someone beneath it. And I stood there holding a tray with my grandmother's spoon in my pocket, 26 years old and 19 again. And I made myself small, and I prepared to disappear. And the doors at the end of the ballroom opened, and the laughing stopped. I have already told you it was Vera. I want to tell you what it was like to watch the room become a different room around her, because that was the moment the two countries I had kept apart collapsed into one, and I learned, standing very still with a tray in my hands, the size of the thing I had married. She came in out of the night in a dark, plain, perfect coat, and she did not raise her voice or her hand or do anything at all except exist in the doorway, and the ballroom reorganized itself around her, like iron filings finding the pole. The volume dropped. Heads turned and kept turning, a wave of them, and the people nearest the door arranged their faces into the careful, pleasant masks that people wear for the person who can end them. And the director of the Institute came hurrying with his hands already out and his color gone. And I heard the word move through the room ahead of her in 100 low voices, the word that was on the banners, the word that was on a corkboard in the most beautiful kitchen I had ever fixed a sauce in, the word I had spent a year and a marriage refusing to read. Vera Solenne, the Solenne of Maison Solenne, the constellation of restaurants that every single cook in that room had spent their life either working in or being rejected by or dreaming about. The most celebrated and most private name in the food world. The owner no one photographed because she did not permit it. The recluse whose 3 flagship kitchens held more stars among them than some entire countries. The woman whose approval made careers and whose attention was rumored, and whose face almost no one in that worshipful industry had ever actually seen. Except me. I had seen that face 18 inches away across a flat top most nights for a year. I had married that face in a registry office. And the universe, with the exact timing of a woman switching 2 bowls at a pass, had chosen this room, this night, this audience, to make me find out. She was scanning the room. For the director, I think, for the host's duties. She had not wanted to come, I learned later. She came to these things once a decade, and only because the Institute's scholarship, the one I had won, was funded by her. A fact that sat me down hard when I finally understood it. And her scan crossed the gathered little crowd, and Camille's bright finishing smile, and found me. found me standing at the edge with a tray and a borrowed dress and a face she had spent a year learning to read better than anyone alive had ever read me. And I watched Vera Solenne understand, in the space of 1 second, with no change in her expression that a stranger could have caught and every change in the world to me, 3 things at once. That the woman she had married worked at a counter that was closing. That this was the room that had done the thing to me she had spent a year gently undoing. And that she had walked in 1 moment too late to stop it from happening again. Her thumb went to the steel ring. Once, slow, she was choosing. And then she chose, and she crossed the room. She did not hurry. That is the detail I keep. 300 of the most important people in food were watching the reclusive empress of their world walk into a gathering she never attended. And she crossed it at the unhurried pace of a woman crossing her own kitchen. And the crowd parted for her. And she walked past the director with his outstretched hands as if he were a coat rack. And she walked up to me, the line cook, the charity case, the furniture, and in front of all of them, she reached out and took the tray out of my hands and set it down, precisely on the nearest surface, parallel to the edge, the way she set everything down. And then she took my hand, the bare ring finger of it, and she laced her fingers through mine so the whole room could see, and she said not loudly, never loudly, in the level exact voice that had been telling me the truth about my own food for a year, "There you are." And then she turned, with my hand in hers, and she looked at Camille, and the room held its breath. Camille, who feared nothing, who had a star and a name and a tuxedo, looked at the hand laced through mine and looked at Vera Solenne's still face, and did the arithmetic that everyone in that room was doing, and I watched the blood leave her. A pause. Say the rest of it. Camille said nothing. The silence was its own confession, and Vera said, into that silence, with a precision that did not need a single decibel of volume, "That counter she works at, Odette's." She let it sit. I have eaten in every serious kitchen in this country. She looked briefly around at the gathered stars, and not one of them met her eyes. Her thumb pressed my hand. "You all spend fortunes teaching people to be clever. She is the only cook I have ever met who is brave enough to be true." A beat. You recognized it exactly. I had never told her. I want that on the record, because it is the thing that undid me, there in the middle of the worst and best night of my life. I had never told Vera about Camille, or the showcase, or the bowls. I had kept the wound in the other country, sealed. I had married her without ever once speaking that woman's name. And she knew anyway. She had known, I understood later, for months. She had heard the shape of it under my salting on the bad nights, had asked, quietly, in the places a person can ask without asking, and had gone and found out the rest, the way Vera Solenne could find out anything, and had said nothing and done nothing and waited, because she knew that to fix it before I was ready would be to take it from me one more time. And now the room that had erased me had reassembled itself to erase me again, and she had walked in 1 moment too late to prevent it. And so she did the only thing left, which was to stand in the middle of the people she had spent her life avoiding, and spend, in 90 seconds, every bit of the power she had spent her life hiding, on me, on making 300 people who had just laughed at me understand precisely what they had laughed at. It was Camille who said it, in the end. Camille, grasping, the way the falling always grasp for the thing that has always worked before, reaching for the old weapon without understanding the ground had moved. And I started to cry, standing in that ballroom, because she did not know, she could not have known, that those 4 words were the words she had been saying across a flat top to a frightened woman for a year. The small ceremony of us. The things she said every single time I tried to call the best of myself nothing. And she had just said them to the woman who taught me to call myself nothing in the first place, in front of the whole world. And the 2 countries of my life were not 2 countries. They never had been. There had only ever been 1 country, and Vera had been the whole of it, the counter and the ballroom, and the wound and the cure, and I had married it without knowing. The way you swallow the sea, not knowing it is the sea, only that you are no longer thirsty. She turned back to me then, and the room and Camille and the press and the guilt and the whole performing world of it fell away from her face. And she was just Vera again, the corner stool, the double taste, the steel ring, and she put her hand against the side of my face. The first time she had ever touched me where anyone could see. The gesture she had withheld for a year out of respect for how slowly I could bear to be reached. And she said low, "Only for me now. I should have told you who I was. I know." Her thumb moved against my cheekbone. And she said, "I didn't sit at your counter for a year because I didn't know how to tell you. I sat at your counter for a year because for the first time in my life, someone was feeding me. Not Solenne, not the stars, not the name. Me. You looked at a tired woman in a wet coat, and you made her the broth, and you asked who taught her to leave it alone. And I thought, if I tell her what I am, I will never get to be just Vera again." Her voice did not shake. Vera's voice never shook. "I was a coward about my name because you were the only place I had ever been a person. That's the whole of it. That's my crime." And I kissed her, in front of all of them. The first real kiss of my entire marriage, in the middle of the Institute's gilded ballroom, under the banners of her name, with my grandmother's spoon in my pocket, and 300 people who had laughed at me watching the woman they were afraid of be kissed by the woman they had erased. I took the front of that plain, perfect coat in both my fists, and I kissed her, and she made a sound against my mouth that no one in that room had ever heard Vera Solenne make, and no one ever would again but me, and I understood that I was not furniture, and I had never been furniture. I was the one person on earth who got to do this, and the not asking had not been cowardice after all. It had been the long, slow, careful work of 2 hunted people building the one room in the world where neither of us had to be the thing we were hunted for. I had not married a stranger. I had married the only safety either of us had ever found, and we had found it across 18 inches in a flat top over a bowl of my grandmother's broth. Both of us hiding, both of us home. We left the gala together, her hand in mine, and we did not hurry, and the room watched us go. And I did not pick up a tray on the way out. I never picked up a tray again. She told me everything that night, in the back of a quiet car, and then in a kitchen I would later learn was the flagship. The most beautiful kitchen I had ever fixed a sauce in, the one with the corkboard. She had eaten at Odette's the first time as Solenne, scouting, anonymous, the way she had eaten everywhere, an empire's owner looking for the next thing. And she had meant to leave after the broth and write a note in a book and never come back. And instead, she had come back the next night. And the next. Not as Solenne, but as a tired woman in a wet coat who had found the one counter in the city where she was no one, and was, for that exact reason, finally herself. And the longer she let it go on, the more impossible the telling became. Until she had bonded me and married me inside a lie of omission so large, she did not know how to put it down without it landing on me like a building. "I kept meaning to tell you," she said, "and every night I didn't was another night I got to just be Vera. I am not sorry I married you. I am sorry I let you do it half blind." And I told her the truth back, which was my own confession, and my full absolution of hers in a single breath. "Vera, I hid my whole self from you for a year. My past, the institute, Camille, the freelance work, the genius you kept insisting I have. I sat across from you every night and showed you a woman with no history because I had decided history was how the knife gets in. We did the same thing. You hid a name and I hid a wound, and we did it for the same reason, which is that the world taught us both that the true thing about us was the dangerous thing. I am not angry that you were Solenne. I'm undone that you were Vera. Do you understand? You could have walked into my counter as the most powerful woman in food and bought me a kitchen, and I would have run. You came in as no one and let me feed you." She put her forehead against mine then, the gesture given back, the steel ring cold against my jaw. And we stayed like that a long time in the most famous kitchen in the country with the lights off, two people who had finally, fully stopped hiding. And I have never in my life been so unafraid. I'll tell you how it sits now, because I know you want the after, and the after is the best of it. Odette's did not become a lobby. Vera bought the building, quietly, the way she did everything, and she put it in Odette's name and mine, not Solenne's, because she said, that counter is the one thing I own that I want to keep no one's empire. And Odette wept exactly one tear, and called Vera the corner woman to her face for the rest of her life, and made her the bitter coffee that strips a pan. And the counter is still 10 stools and a flat top and a chalkboard, still not photographed, still the best food in the city that almost no one knows about. Except now sometimes the most celebrated chefs in the world come and sit on the stools and eat what the market gave us that morning, and try, mostly failing, to taste what I taste. And I do not let them put their names on any of it. I cook things I mean now. All of it, every service. The thing Camille told me I did not have woke all the way up under a year, of a quiet woman refusing to let me call it nothing. And it does not go back to sleep. It took me 26 years, and a woman who owns half the kitchens in the country sitting at my counter, pretending to be no one. But I say it now, about myself, out loud. I am a chef. The best palate in this city, a recluse who has tasted everything once told a ballroom, and I have decided finally to believe her, because she has never once flattered me, and she would know. Camille, I will give you in one sentence, because she does not get more than that from me anymore, which is its own kind of victory. The story of the gala traveled the way stories do in a small, jealous industry, and a great many people who had laughed remembered suddenly that they had always had their doubts about the bowls. And Camille's star did the slow, quiet thing that stars do when a whole world decides at once to look slightly to the left of you. I do not gloat about it. I learned, expensively, what it does to a person to be erased by a room, and I would not wish the full of it on her. But I do not lie awake over it either. She taught me I was a pair of hands. She was wrong, and the wrongness cost her everything. And there is a justice in the world after all. It just keeps a counter's hours. It comes late, near closing, in out of the rain, and you have to have kept the lamp on. And Vera still comes in most nights, late, the corner stool against the wall, and orders whatever the board says and tastes everything twice, and presses her thumb to the steel ring when she is thinking. And when I slide her the broth and start to say, it's just out of a habit 8 years deep, she sets her fork down parallel to the plate and looks at me and says it is never just. And I believe her now, all the way down. And I tasted, the way I have tasted everything since I was a child on a stool, and I told her the truth, which was the truth about the broth, and the truth about the whole of my saved and unhidden life. Nothing, I said. It doesn't want anything, which is the highest thing my grandmother ever said about a dish, and the highest thing I will ever say about a life. And I get to say it now, both of us in From the Rain, the lamp on, nobody's empire, just ours.